In this video, what I would like to do is to summarize which are the good fats, which are the bad fats, and to talk about why. So first we're going to start with the good fats. We need fats, and some fats are better than others. The good fats are, believe it or not, cholesterol. Cholesterol we need in our body because it is the precursor for a lot of the hormones, and it's also the precursor for vitamin D. We make all the cholesterol that we need, so getting cholesterol in the diet is what's bad, but cholesterol itself is fine. Triglycerides. You know that triglycerides are used for energy, but they also have functions in the body besides just being burned for calories that cannot be replaced by anything else. And that's why it's not a good idea to have a no-fat diet. You need some. What fat does that cannot be done by any other macronutrient is it transports those fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, D, E, and K. If you don't have fat in your diet, you can take as much of these vitamins as you want, but it will never be absorbed by your body because there's nothing that can carry it across the through the bloodstream. In addition to these sort of generic functions, there's also a class of fatty acids that we cannot make for ourselves and that other fats cannot substitute. And this research is fairly recent, meaning like within the last 10 or 20 years. And these are the omega-3 and the omega-6 fatty acids. Why we need them is because they are used to make a class of compounds called the eicosanoids. And the eicosanoids are involved in inflammation response, modulating the two. So when you have an inflammation response, say to an infection, what happens is that there is a vasoconstriction, you get blood clotting forming, and then you get this red heat swelling phenomena. And all of that, those reactions require the eicosanoids. Omega-3 fatty acids also make eicosanoids, but the omega-3 based eicosanoids have the opposite action as the omega-6s. So instead of causing vasoconstriction, they cause vasodilation. Instead of helping to form blood clots, they prevent them. And instead of being used for inflammation, they prevent inflammation. So it's important in your diet that you have a balance of the two. Otherwise, you will have too much vasoconstriction and not enough vasodilation. And if the two sides of the inflammatory response are out of whack, it can cause health problems. And most of us get plenty of, most of us get plenty of the omega-6 fatty acids, but the omega-3 fatty acids are pretty rare in our diet. So most people are actually deficient in omega-3 fatty acids compared to omega-6. So what is the evidence that lacking these essential fatty acids causes health problems? Well, if you have either one of those is missing from your diet in childhood, you will see stunted growth. In the old days when people made baby formula, breast milk has omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids in it, but they didn't know to add these fatty acids to formula, and what they saw was stunted growth with babies who were fed formula. The other things are the sort of things that you would imagine from having imbalances in your immune response, rashes, but it also has an effect on vision and the ability of your nerves to function. Deficiencies, true deficiencies, are pretty rare because we get lots of fat in our diet. But this is mainly most of the vegetable oils that we like to eat have lots of omega-6 in them, but not as much omega-3. And so many people have a slight deficiency in this realm. In addition to their essential functions, there's also some evidence that the omega-3 fatty acids are playing a functional role in our body. Over time, people have been looking at whether or not omega-3 fatty acids can help with heart disease, and we're going to see in a little bit why that is. There is some evidence, meaning that there are small clinical trials or epidemiological evidence, case control studies, that omega-3 fatty acids, if you give them to people above and beyond what is the essential requirement, that it can reduce cholesterol, lower blood pressure, reduce atherosclerosis, and reduce incidence of stroke. There's better evidence, meaning good clinical trials, at least 2 with large sample sizes, that having supplying omega-3 fatty acids in excess of the requirements can prevent heart disease and lower blood pressure. And then the claim that omega-3 fatty acids has actually been approved to, you can now say that if your foods have omega-3 fatty acids in them, that they reduce lower triglyceride levels, blood triglyceride levels. And the number of health claims that are approved by the FDA for foods is very rare, is very small. So that's pretty significant for them to be doing that. All right, so those are the good fats. Let's now talk about the bad fats. First of all, why we should limit fats overall is I just want to remind you that fats have a very high caloric density. And so eating a lot of them, is linked to obesity. So if you look at the difference between a Chick-fil-A sandwich when it's grilled, in other words no fat, versus a Chick-fil-A sandwich that's been fried, just the amount of oil that is picked up in the breading and absorbed by the breading is enough to increase the calories by 50%. That's a lot. So overall, the recommendation is that we should not have any more than 20 to 35% of our calories from fat. But the main reason that fats are bad has to do with the effect of these fats on cardiovascular disease. And that's why we are talking about fats for the first time in conjunction with this unit on cardiovascular disease. So the evidence that fat is linked to cardiovascular disease came from epidemiological studies that were done in the 1990s. And these were the big epidemiological studies, the nurses study, the physicians' health study. And what they found is that those people who enrolled in the study who were eating high-fat diets anyways were more likely to have cardiovascular disease 5-10 years down the road. So based on that, the FDA came out with nutrition advice from the Dietary Guidelines from America in the 1990s that emphasized a low-fat, high-carb diet was the best for you. And where you can see this is if you look at the food pyramid, which was the My Plate icon of its day. And what you can see is that the food pyramid emphasized fat content. So here's this little symbol, means the fat is up here. And what you want to do is have less of this and eat more of the foods that are low in fat. However, after that epidemiological study, there were a number of clinical trials, and this was a large-scale, high-quality clinical trial. And what they did is they took two groups of subjects and randomly assigned them to either eat whatever they want or to go on a low-fat diet. And when they followed them up 8 years later even, they saw a very, very small difference, almost none, between the risk, between the amount of coronary heart disease that people came down with years later. So the epidemiological evidence said low-fat diets are correlated, but when they actually did the clinical trial, it didn't have any effect. And this was a big surprise for everybody. So the current thinking is that the reason that epidemiological evidence showed the correlation between high-fat diets and cardiovascular disease was because it's the type of fats that you eat, not the total fat, that matters. So our current nutrition advice is focused on reducing the bad fats and also using a diet that has a high vegetable content. So boosting our vegetable consumption as a way of displacing that high fat and foods, and particularly those foods that have animal fats in them, which is one of the big sources of the bad fats. So the clinical trial evidence, and this comes from, I think this was in 2013, so this was just published in April, is they did a clinical trial with a large group of students, of subjects who were middle-aged and elderly. These are the people who are at the highest risk for cardiovascular disease. So they took these patients and they randomly assigned them to 3 diets. They were either low fat, similar to what we saw with the previous clinical trial, or they were assigned to one of 2 different versions of what's called the Mediterranean diet. And then they followed those patients for 4 to 5 years and tracked the incidence of cardiovascular disease among those 3 groups. And what they found was that both variants of the Mediterranean diet reduced the incidence of cardiovascular disease by 30% in just less than 5 years. So that is some pretty amazing evidence. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is that the Mediterranean diet actually promotes the use of olive oil, which is, of course, pure fat. The other version of the Mediterranean diet emphasized almonds, nuts, almonds, walnuts, and hazelnuts, which are natural sources of certain fats. And both of those groups did better than people who were just following a generic low-fat diet. So let's talk about what this Mediterranean diet is. What is involved? Here is the pyramid, the food pyramid from the Mediterranean diet. And what you can see is at the base there's foods that you are supposed to eat every day. They consist of the grains, of vegetables, fruits, beans, legumes, and nuts, olive oil, cheese, and yogurt. So that is supposed to be your daily diet. Supplementing that a few times a week, you should have single servings of fish or poultry or eggs or sweets. And red meat should only be eaten a few times per month in very small amounts. All right, so what's the difference? Some of that may look very much like the low-fat pyramid from the year 2000, but just take a look at these two pyramids and see if you can tell the difference between the two. So one of the main differences is with the meats group. Here in the USDA, they're all grouped together, and you should have 2 to 3 servings every single day. 2 to 3 servings every single day. That means that you need to have some sort of protein source with every single meal. Compare that to the Mediterranean diet. Here you see fish, poultry, eggs, sweets, and meat only a few times per month. So first of all, not all meats are the same. Here they're all treated as being the same. If you add up the total number of servings that you have of meats, fish, poultry, eggs, and red meat, it adds up to maybe 1 serving per day. So a lot of us as Americans have this idea that with every meal we have to have meat, we have to have protein of some sort. But this pyramid actually emphasizes less overall meat. The cheese and yogurt, on the other hand, is comparable. So the best protein sources are from cheese and yogurt and beans and legumes and nuts. And those is what you should have daily for your protein source. The other difference in emphasis is with those fats, oils, and sweets. So here in the American pyramid, it's at the top of the pyramid, and you're only supposed to use it sparingly, meaning probably in the same order as the red meat, maybe once a week. Here in the Mediterranean diet, you're supposed to have olive oil every single day. And that's a huge difference. So what's with olive oil? Olive oil is a good source of the good fats, and the meats are a good source, a rich source of the bad fats. So what are the bad fats? Our current understanding is that what we need to do is to limit cholesterol that comes in the diet. We have no control over how much cholesterol our body makes, although there are some drugs that you can take that may lower it a bit. And why is that? Because the evidence is pretty strong that having excess cholesterol circulating through your bloodstream causes those plaque buildups that becomes atherosclerosis. We also need to limit trans fats. Why? Because trans fats raise blood cholesterol, and blood cholesterol causes atherosclerosis. So the effect of trans fats is indirect. Saturated fats also have an effect on raising blood cholesterol levels. In a separate video, what I'm going to do is go through where these LDLs and HDLs come from and how the body absorbs and circulates cholesterol. That will make some of this more apparent. So in summary, The dietary guidelines are more complicated for fats than they are for the other macronutrients. Overall, it's recommended that for your whole caloric intake, that the total fat should equal 20 to 35% or less. And this is done to limit the effects of obesity. Saturated fats you should limit to less than 10% of your total calorie intake. And cholesterol is not burned for fuel, so it's not counted with calories, but instead it's counted in milligrams. And the recommendation is that your daily intake should not exceed more than 300 milligrams every day. This pie chart doesn't address the trans fats and the omega fats. For the trans fats, to put them on a grid like this would make it look like they are okay. But for trans fats, there is no safe level that has been established for trans fats. All trans fats seem to raise blood cholesterol, and so you should have no trans fats in your diet if at all possible. For omega-3 fatty acids, the evidence is still not quite there for them to issue a recommendation as to how much of the omega-3 fatty acids you should have. But there are some guidelines from other organizations other than the FDA, like the American Heart Association, which say that based on the studies that have been done, if you have 1,100 to 1,600 milligrams per day of the omega-3 fatty acids, you will reap both the essential benefits of the omega-3 fatty acids and also the heart protective functional benefits of the omega-3 fatty acids.